being a west part, you have development of the fruit that goes on what we can define the main character of Castellina, this cherry Sangiovese flavor. Sometimes it's like a strawberry, and that's really a characteristic of the area. There are other areas of the Chianti Classico that are more about the flowers and more about purple fruits. Castellina, it's really more about pink fruit. This is what you can find as a common DNA. I always say Castellina is a territory where you can find Sangiovese for different kind of palates, because the west part you have Sangiovese that goes more out of your teeth, on the sense that when you have it in your mouth is more like cuddling your cheeks. It's more a larger fruit, not in the sense that it's thick, but on the sense that it covers all your mouth. In the east part, it's more a fruit that stays on your tongue, more center focus inside the teeth. Those are two characteristics that I find out by tasting all my colleagues, and I think give a bit of the idea how Castellina is.
Welcome to this special Clubhouse session of the Italian Wine Podcast. Listen in as members of the Italian wine community engage in fascinating conversations about contemporary wine topics. If you enjoyed the show, please consider donating through ItalianWinePodcast.com, and remember to subscribe and rate the Italian Wine Podcast wherever you get your pods.
Hi everyone, this is Beatrice welcoming you to the Italian Wine Clubhouse Ambassadors Corner, one of the top-ranked shows on Italian Wine Podcast. Here, our ambassadors get the mic to interview their favorite producers with total freedom. And if you miss it live, no worries, it's all recorded and dropped later on the Italian Wine Podcast. Today's guest host is Stephanie Johnson. Stephanie is a wine writer and wine educator based in New York City. She holds the WSET diploma in wine and spirit and is certified as an Italian wine expert by Vinitaly Academy. Her wine career spans the journalism, retail, and restaurant sectors, including 5 years as wine director at City Winery in Soho. She joined Wine and Spirit magazine as tasting director in 2013 and later served as Italian wine editor from 2016 to 2024. Stephanie has judged at international competitions such as the Concours Mondial du Sauvignon in Bordeaux and 5-Star Wines in Verona. She has led masterclasses for top sommelier in New York City and presented at major industry events, including Vinitaly and Wine to Wine in Verona. A passionate educator, she teaches WSET Level 2, 3, and diploma courses at New York City International Wine Center. Her upcoming venture, Steeplejack, will spotlight the heroic stories of Italian wine producers, blending deep expertise with compelling storytelling. Today, she's gonna interview Sophie Conte of Tregole Winery from Castellina in Chianti. So, how you doing, Stephanie, and how you doing, Sophie?
I'm great, thanks.
I'm also really good.
Perfect.
Hello.
Stephanie, are you ready for our 3 ritual questions?
I am ready.
How did you discover the wines of Tregole Winery?
So I was at Vinitaly a few years ago, and I was in the Chianti Classico booth, and I was speaking with Caterina Mori. Probably most people here know Caterina, and she knows everybody in Chianti Classico. So I asked her, who are some of the new up-and-coming producers in Chianti Classico that I should start to get to know? And she recommended, as one of these, Sophie. And it just so happened that she knew Sophie was nearby. She went and brought her to the booth, and that's where Sophie and I met. And we had a great discussion about Tregole. And then a couple years later, actually just last year, I had the chance to visit Sophie at her winery.
So tell us, why did you select Sophie Conte as your featured guest?
Well, she makes really good wines, first of all, which is the number one criteria for any coverage of anybody that I either write about or talk to. But also, I just think she has a great energy and sense of humor and passion about her work and willingness to experiment and learn from each vintage. And that's really interesting to me. And I think it's important in regions like Chianti Classico and all Italian regions to start listening to the next upcoming generation of winemakers. And so I think she's a voice that we will be hearing in the future.
I can't agree more. What are the learning objectives that we should expect from this interview?
Well, I'm kind of looking at this as if I were sitting across from Sophie at her tasting table, which I've done. And what kinds of questions would I ask her, and what would I be interested in learning from her if I were visiting her? And so, one of the things I would ask her about, first of all, is kind of breaking news. What's been happening recently? How has the 2025 harvest gone? I'd kind of want to learn about her position in Castellina in the UGA and how she sees her winery as fitting into that scenario. And then as a younger winemaker, I would kind of be interested to hear what are some of the challenges she has faced and how she has met those as she's, just begun within the last, I guess, 10 years in this venture.
Perfect. It's time for me to mute myself. Now I'm turning over the floor to you, Stephanie. Have a nice interview.
Thanks, B. All right. Hey, Sophie.
Hello, Stephanie. How are you?
I'm well. How are you doing?
Really good. Super happy to hear you.
Great. Well, let's start with what's going on right now. I was just reading this morning, not in your region, but about what's happening up in Friuli and how awful these rains are. But I'm just curious what's happening right now in Chianti Classico and what has been your experience of the 2025 vintage?
So luckily we haven't had all the big amount of water that they had in Friuli. We are a hilly area, as you know, so we had a lot of water altogether, but drained down. So we didn't have really problems about that, but we have always more often rain that comes with a lot of water altogether. And that's always more often. It's not really easy for the plants because it's all the water that comes so fast on the ground just goes down the hill and doesn't drain really in the soil. So it's not really a healthy kind of water. You know, the healthy kind of water is more what we call the English rain, like slowly raining, and slowly melting in the ground. This year has been a year where we had a pretty good year. I must say that spring was great. We had a great balanced spring with rain and sun, and the flowering went really good. In June, we had a nice July. Then the heat arrived, but was never too hot. We had a changement in the end of July that temperatures went a bit over, like above of the normal temperatures, was a bit more hot than what we usually expect in end of July. So that made the plant a bit faster than what was it. But then everything slowed down because it lasts for just 1 week. And so we had a good July, was not too hot beginning of August. Then we had a good end of August. Things start to become a bit more complicated in September because September was rainy. We had a pretty good amount of water between the 10 and the 20 of September. Just to give you an idea, in 3 days, we got around 45 millimeters of water. That's a lot for us. So we were a bit scared for the skins of the grapes because a lot of water together can cause breaks on the grapes. That happened, but in a really small percentage because after that bad rain, we had sun and then another bit of rain. But then in the end of September, we had what we call in Tuscany ottobrata. That means that it's like a good October in the meaning of having cold nights, nice days with sun, no clouds, always a bit of wind. And that's all we want in October, as you can imagine. So we lost a tiny bit in September because of the rain. I counted more or less between the 10 and the 15% of lost of grapes that I cut down because the skins were becoming a bit more thin and were breaking. But for the rest, we picked great grapes. I did all the selection I like to do. I like to do more than one harvest on the plant. So for the last bunches, I left them on the plant till more or less the 12th of October. So I consider myself happy about the harvest. And I think compared to 23 and 24, we have a harvest where I am, I have material to work also with Riserva and Gran Selezione that didn't happen with 23 and part not also on 24. So I'm happy. And now, we are in autumn, olives are done, we have olive oil made, winter is coming as as Game of Thrones says, and we just have a quiet time. So everything it's great at the moment.
Glad to hear that about the harvest. That's really good
Yeah.
news. And I just want to follow up on a couple things that you said there. First of all, these really heavy rain events, and I've heard this from other winemakers in all different regions of Italy, that these are becoming more common and that really heavy, violent, sudden, and short amounts of rainfall have been destructive in a lot of places. Again, we just talked about Friuli, but do you have like that kind of historical perspective on the region to say that that is actually something that has changed in Chianti Classico? Are these more common, would you say?
So it's growing. It's growing a bit. We always had rain. Our area of the world is an area where we have rain in autumn, spring, a bit in summer, and also in winter. For sure, the amount of water altogether, it's something that in the past, my winemaking history is not really good. So I relate to my like working time, winemaking time, and to what other winemakers and all the people tell me. We are facing more often big amount of water coming all together. It's hard a bit to say, it's hard to look on statistics because mostly statistics tell you the amount of water that you get in a territory on a year or in a month or in a season. So how can I say, it can be fake, not in the sense that it's not true, but in the sense that if we squeeze the amount that comes in one day in 1 month, then we lose the perception.
Yeah.
So it's a bit hard at the moment to have a proper statistic, but I think it's growing and that it's pushing us on the direction that we have to think more of how we need to manage our protection that we give to the plants and to the vines. And with that, I mean also the control of diseases, also because wineries like me that work on organic, we use products that are organic. So they just lay on the plant, they don't go in the system of the plant. And for that, we just relate on a certain amount of water that they can resist on. And it's really tiny. So that's a big point of question that we need to put also on the pharmaceutical production of the products, because we need to go in the direction of bringing up the resistancy of the products, or in the future will be really hard to make organic wine. And of course we don't want, but we start asking ourselves, we are in a region that we still manage really good. We have other regions that give us an example of how tough can be to arrive in the end of the year and spray 30 times, 28 times, compared to a more conventional system where they spray 12 times. So probably the direction would be or to have new products or to become more hybrid and
Mhm.
to work more on what happens. So I don't want to be extreme, or just say something before that happens, but I think we have to, for our
Yeah.
work. So the amount of water goes a lot on that where I
Mhm.
am. Probably in areas that are not so hilly, the problem will be also the draining of the water.
Yeah. So basically, to me, the takeaways there are that you have to be adaptable as a winemaker and not just dogmatic about the way you're approaching your vineyards. And also that unfortunately, fake news has now also reached Chianti Classico. So just one other thing to follow up on. um, you mentioned that you leave some of the grapes on the vine up into kind of early mid-October. What happens to those grapes? Like, what are you trying to achieve with those particular bunches?
I always say my dream is to have no leaves on the plant and the grapes hanging, but that's a bit extreme. Where I am, the maturation of the grape, it is low. So we need long time to make the grapes mature, but not just arrive on their right phenolic time and technologic time, but just also to develop the flavors. We don't have problems of leaving the plants and have too much alcohol amount on the wine. So my aim is to leave them on the plant on a time like mid-October, where we have a great excursion between day and night. And that's the point where you develop the most intriguing flavors on the Sangiovese because of this big exchange and because of the lower temperature with sun, of course, during the day. But it's also a season where we start getting rain and summer is ending, autumn is arriving. So we need to be really ready on picking when it's the right timing. I just push as much as I can because I always say what I gain on the plant, I will never gain also with the time in the cellar. And I don't do anything in the cellar, but it's probably just a thing of maturation. So the more I leave it on the plant, the more we have to say in the glass. And so that's why I try to push the more possible on mid-October. For example, 2022, I left the bunches on the plant till the 17th of October, and that was great. The amount of flavor that you develop on this way are imparagonabile. I don't know how to say it. Just as I said, you would never get it in the cellar.
Right. It's the only way to actually develop that kind of complexity and depth. You can't just create that in the cellar. But it's interesting to me. So you're saying you don't achieve too much alcohol, meaning the grapes are not still accumulating sugar after a certain point or dropping acidity. It's just the skins that are developing, or how does that work?
So to give you an idea, we start getting the end of the invaiatura of the time that grapes get the color, that it's nearly not mid-August, but close. And we have a maturation in September because nights are so cool in Tregole that it's really slow. So the acidity, to give you an idea, the lowest acidity I have ever developed, I give you the bottle one, that is maybe easier to understand than the cellar one. In the bottle, it's 6.8 on an old vineyard. That means that it's really hard. They will never drop on a point that they are not balanced with the rest. We start with acidities, average acidity on a young vineyard, ending in the bottle, it's 7.2, 7.3. So with a pH that is around 325, 330, depending. And alcohol, the maximum I had in a hot year, like 19 and 20, was 13.8, 14 for some things. And the lowest I have, it's vintage 24, it's 12.5. So I'm in this range. And for how it's structured, the rest of the wine, they never push too much on one direction or the other. I try to stay in these parameters and develop the more possible. That's what makes really the difference.
Yeah. And the grapes that you harvest later, you're vinifying them separately. Is that correct? What does that go into? You blend those into all of your wines or just certain wines? How does that work?
So I have 6 plots, and all the 6 plots go around the hill of Tregole. There is a east-facing hill on maximum 600 meters. If I'm not wrong, that would be pretty much 1,900 feet. Is it right? I think.
I'm bad at math, so I'll take you for it.
I think more or less. And the lowest point would be 540 meters. So that's considered pretty a high area facing east with really stony ground. We have the vineyards that are used for the Chianti Classico. They go all around the hill. So starting from one plot west, one north, one northeast, and one east. And in those 4 plots, depending on the harvest, I can do 2 harvests on each plot. On the meaning that I pick the bunches for when they are mature, and on one plant, not all the bunches mature on the same timing. That's because some of them are more close one to the other. Some of them are more staying alone. The one that are on the peak of the plant have a different maturation, the one that are more close to the old wood. And so what we do, we try to harvest them always on the right timing. It's like cooking, when you use ingredients, or every ingredient has a different time of cooking. Is the same thing with the grapes and the fermentation. We want to pick them on the right timing so that they have a right fermentation and they have the right adapted time of fermentation. So we have a bigger tank with a bigger amount of the plot, and we have a second smaller tank with the second peak part of the grapes. And that's more or less for every plot, for the Chianti Classico and also for the plot of Riserva and Gran Selezione. Sometimes, mostly the plots of Riserva and Gran Selezione, that are the one that for location and for how the plants are, because are all plants, so they have really big bunches, really big berries. They can have certain vintages 3 harvests on the plant, so 3 tanks for each plot, but in the end, they go in the same bottle, right? So it's more a matter of giving each one the right timing. Otherwise, if I would do a bottle of every tank that I do, I would need probably around 15 different labels. So, so I just it's more a matter of trying to give, because after fermentation there is not much that we do in the cellar. So wine is made on that time, So I try to do it on their properly related on the status of the bunch. That's why.
Got it. Okay. You were sort of mentioning the exposures of your vineyards, and I would love for you to kind of set the scene for people of, maybe a little bit about Castellina. I mean, Castellina is this very large, diverse UGA, and you're in a very particular part of it. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about how Tregole fits into Castellina and what is sort of unique or different about your particular plots or your property.
So that's a question that this year a lot of people made me, and I'm trying every time that I answer to be more clear. But as you said, Castellina is a territory that has a lot of differences because it's a territory that has a big hill that goes from north to south of the territory and divides the territory on a east and on a west. And the bigger part of the territory is the west part, where we have soils that go from 250 to 180 meters till 500, 450. Then on the other side of the hill, we have the east part, and we go more or less the peak of this hill. It's 620 in certain points. So on the east, we have the same thing, but the east is more steep. So on the east part, we don't really go down. We don't have vineyards on the lower part because there is no proper valley. So with this idea of a hill dividing the territory, you can imagine if we want to divide, we have a north, south, east, and west part of Castellina, but the main part of the production of wineries in Castellina is on the west. And being a west part, you have development of the fruit that goes on what we can define the main character of Castellina, that it's this cherry Sangiovese flavor. Sometimes it's like a strawberry, and that's really a characteristic of the area. There are other areas of the Chianti Classico that are more about the flowers and more about purple fruits. Castellina, it's really more about a pink fruit. And this is what you can find as a common DNA. Then, of course, you have big differences. On the east part where I am, we have that part of cherry with an addiction of the crunchiness of the altitude because where we are located. So if I have to say, yeah, the cherry and the strawberry are the main characteristic of Castellina. I always say Castellina is a territory where you can find Sangiovese for different kind of palates, because we have the west part you have Sangiovese that goes more out of your teeth, on the sense that when you have it in your mouth, is more like cuddling your cheeks. It's more a larger fruit, but not in the sense that it's thick, but on the sense that it covers all your mouth. In the east part, it's more a fruit that stays on your tongue, so more center focus inside the teeth. And those are two characteristics that I find out by tasting all my colleagues, and I think give a bit of the idea how Castellina is.
That aspect of the East, are you thinking that's mainly because you're getting more of the morning sun, whereas the West is getting the hotter afternoon sun? Do you have any idea
Yeah.
how you would
Yeah.
attribute that?
So on where I am, so my west, it's right on the top of the high part of Castellina, right? So
Hmm.
is a afternoon sun in a high point. So on my west part, I develop pretty unique flavors like curry, green spices. And on the north part, I develop a lot about the fruits that we were talking. So more like the cherry and the strawberry. Then the east part develops a bit more the purple flower flavors. The four sides go in the Chianti Classico. Then the Riserva and Gran Selezione are made from east and a tiny corner that looks southeast part, and they are more on the mix of flower and fruit. So the west part where I am, it's a pretty unique part that I don't bottle alone. I mix with the rest of the Chianti Classico.
Okay, got it.
I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, you did. I mean, I think I at least am trying to get my head around each particular UGA and how can I sort of characterize each UGA. And sometimes it's really hard because there are so many different aspects to different parts of it. But I
True.
think that was helpful.
I think the hard part, it's a lot about that we are super hilly and foresty part of the world, And so, for example, if we would talk about a more plain area or more smooth hills, would be easier to have a common denominator, like a common description. Because imagine a long mountain, like hill, that it's not like the mountain that you draw that you picture when you are a kid, right, with the peak and then goes down like a triangle. It's a mountain that on that has a lot of hills, and the shape has sides where you have a river, sides where you have another tiny valley in the mountain, and then another hill. It's all moved, right? So also when we talk about the west or the east, then in their est west and east, you have inside the winery his own est and west. Sorry, I'm making confusion, but it's so diversified, the territory, that it's really hard to just give one descriptor to describe it. I think we can tell about the territory on the result by killing a bit of the shades and the corners, but it's not really easy. So I understand what you say. That's why I tried to explain it on the fruit flavor, because I think also when we did blind tasting with a lot of other winemakers, young winemakers, we find the descriptors of the areas, and really Castellina on a blind tasting has this pink cherry and strawberry that a lot coming out for all the areas. Then inside, every winemaker has a different time of aging, but
Sure.
that's what I would describe Castellina. Yeah.
It's interesting that you talk about tasting with other winemakers because one of the things I have noticed going around to different UGAs, now that that system has kicked into place more officially, is that some of the UGAs have these very strong grower associations that taste each other's wines and that are actually really not working together necessarily, but they're sort of, it's causing almost more of a cohesion of style, right? Because you're comparing yourself more to your neighbors and you're learning from your neighbors, and so therefore you're sort of developing more of an identifiable style within your community. I'm just curious if that's happening in Castellina officially, or if this is more of an unofficial kind of, you're hanging out with some of the younger winemakers and you're sharing your insights.
So I think our territory, and you, Stephanie, know it from a long time, it's a territory that is changing a lot. We are on a time where we are, I think the culture it's changing a lot. And that's because people try to stimulate each other and to have a common sense of the territory, a common sense what Chianti Classico means, a common sense of the land and what is our future. And that comes because people sit down and taste together. And that's really, really important. I think it happens in multiple different ways. I tell you what are the ways that I see. And we taste wines also blind when we have a dinner with colleagues and friends on the territory. We taste wine when we do meetings with the associations. We invite the other winemakers when we do events with our association to relate and talk about the territory. For example, on the 4th of December, we have an event where we invite four big distributors in Italy, and we want them to present us what are our competitors on the market with the same price, with a similar story, and taste them with all the winemakers of Castellina and the winemakers of the other UGA to understand how the market is going, what people are interested in, what is our point of view. And I think that's what makes our territory always more strong, because we are in a time that we want to exchange, and as you said, it's not about comparing. I think of course we all do it, but it's more about understanding and developing a common culture. UGA is a really important thing because people need to look what they have under their feet, and that's really important for the territory. We need to talk about that, and we need to develop this culture, and we only can do it by staying together and talking about of what we do. And the exchange then goes on a lot of things. When I choose a cork, I have a different structure of choosing a cork compared to maybe a bigger company that has a proper laboratory. And so it's really important that the community is together for the culture, but also for more practical things.
And so continuing a little bit on the UGA theme, you started making a Gran Selezione, but it was more recent, wasn't it, than your other wines?
So I started doing wine in 2015.
Mm-hmm.
Was my first vintage. I've been pretty lucky because it was a great year. So I could only make mistakes, with a great year. And I started doing Chianti Classico and Riserva that year. I introduced Gran Selezione on 2018 because of a complicated harvest. 18 had a lot of rain in October. My idea was to leave the grapes of the older vines a bit longer, but then a lot of rain arrived between the end of September and beginning of October. So what I did in the end, that was my first vintage that I did 3 harvests on the plants. And because of this super precise fermentation of the plot, I understood how the plot that now I use for Gran Selezione and the plot that I use for Riserva, that they used to go together in the Riserva, were taking completely different roads. The Riserva, it's a plot where I build up a lot of juice and muscles with a nice acidity, but it's the place where wines become a bit more large compared to the Gran Selezione that is a bit higher, a bit more steep. And there I develop more balsamic part, more fine parts. And because of that difference, I decided to divide it. And then for me, the plot that I kept for Riserva, it's really what I expect from a Riserva. So a wine that has muscles and juice to be present today, but then you can understand that can also age with time, compared to the Gran Selezione, that is probably a wine that could be, for some vintages, more hard to understand. Is not necessarily really muscly, but it's for sure the most fine and intriguing one that can probably, some vintages maybe need a bit more time in the bottom.
Okay. And so you make those 3 Chianti Classicos. You do make an IGT, I believe, right?
I make a white rosé,
Okay.
and that's it.
A
Yeah.
white rosé. What is Is it white or is it rosé?
Yeah, it depends on the harvest. That's the thing. So I started doing it because one year I had a young guy from Germany that used to work with Riesling that came and wanted to do a harvest in Tregole. In the end, he liked it a lot. So he remained 1 year working with me. And then with the time, he starts seeing the results of the analysis of the wine and says, Sophie, you have acidity that you could do a white or a sparkling wine. I was like, no, I don't want to do sparkling wine because I think there are good sparkling wine makers. I think so. He said, why we don't try to do a white Sangiovese? And that came out really white the first year. It's like bunches. We change it a bit with time, but it's like full bunches. We pick them a week earlier than the Sangiovese, depending on the harvest. But now we are more or less a week before the Sangiovese for the Chianti Classico. We choose the bunches that have the thicker skin so that when they crush, they don't melt, they don't release the color, and they go in a tank. We press them a bit, but the idea is that weight of the bunches one over the other release a bit of juice, and of course they break when they fall. So they release a bit of juice. The bottom of the tank is open so that the liquid does not remain on the tank, so it just comes out always. And at the point that I see that the color is coming out to pink, I close it. So goes on. Every harvest is a bit different, because skins change a lot from one harvest to the other. But it's the idea, it's that we try with this bottle the proper, what we call flower of Sangiovese. And the flower of Sangiovese, we call it mosto fiore. It's the first juice that has skin contact. And over there, you have flavors of Sangiovese that you lose with the maceration, with the fermentation. There are flavors incredibly going on the direction of like yellow flowers, like Ginestra. It's a really flowery wine with salty and fresh mouth. So I leave it with a tiny bit of sugar. Like last year, I left 2 grams. This year, I left 4 grams of residual sugar, just because Sangiovese can be a bit harsh before his proper maturation time. And so I decided to leave a bit of sugar. And that's something that my good friends from the Riesling area teach me, as you can imagine. And so it's a white rosé because every year is a bit different. And my customers are not really happy because one year I call it white and a year I call it rosé. But in the end, now it's called wine, and it comes every year a bit different.
And what's the name of that wine?
Chicchero.
What does that mean?
So the meaning of Chicchero in Siena, when you play cards, we have this way of saying that if an unexpected card comes down on the table that changes the game, it's called Chicchero. Actually, we say cala il Chicchero, like put the Chicchero on the table. It's like an ace that takes everything, or a joker. It's the unexpected, and that's what you have in the glass, something unexpected because comes from Sangiovese but looks white and has really yellow flower flavors and salty back taste.
That's a great name. So what year did you start making the white rosé?
So the first year we did was 19, but we did something like 50 liters. The more we drink in the house to understand if it was good or not. And then the year that we properly did it was a bit more 2020.
I'm curious. So you've kind of developed different things each year or each couple of years, and I'm curious to hear. You started in 2015, your first harvest. I would love to hear, like, what are some of the most important things that you have changed since then, or things that you feel like you have learned from either good harvests or difficult harvests that you have incorporated into your practices, whether it's in the vineyard or in the cellar?
So I started without having studied any enologist or agronomist school. So I started for what was my knowledge of the work that I did for other wineries. but I always did only one part of the production. When you do something all around, it's really different than just doing one part. So my first 4 years have been mostly understanding where I was, how the plants were, what was the result, how things were changing, if I would pick one day or the other, or if I would keep the leaves in a way or the other, and how every plot was different, how were the difference in each plot. So my first years have been really a study of Tregole. And meanwhile, I was doing wine, but the wine changed a lot because I learned every harvest and every season a lot of different aspects about the wine and the place. To give you an idea, now I work with full berries. So I just destem the grapes. I don't crush them and press them anymore. And that came because in Tregole things take longer time. The seeds, the tannins can be a bit hard if they are not well managed. So what I start to do, and it came out only as a practical choice. I started to keep the seeds in the berry, so to not crush the berries, so that I would have not so many seeds going around the tank during the rimontaggi, the pumpings, because I have no space to separate them and to take them out of the tank. And so in the end, every harvest, I started with one plot full berries, and then slowly I moved everything to full berries because I understood that with that system, I was more working on the skin than on the pulp. So I was extracting more the fine parts of the skin instead of the more body part that are in the berry. So that's a result that you can feel on the wine, but that I start using because a practical consequence. And that happened with a lot of things. I start to do fermentation with, I arrived in Tregole, everything was on cordon. Slowly I move everything to Guyot. And that was a big change for the plants. Then some slowly I change how I keep the green. Every vintage is different, the managing that I have on the leaves. Also having 2 3 harvests came because of how the harvest of 2018 was. Everything comes from a consequence, that comes from a practical need. For example, at the beginning I used to do fermentation with selected yeast because I had no confidence to do it, and I was not sure that the cellar had enough yeast. Of course, it did, but I was not sure because the cellar is a cellar that is in a house from the year 1000. So there is a good amount of yeast in the cellar, but it was me that I was not ready. So I started slowly when I had a bit of confidence in 2019. Yeah, the first tank with spontaneous alcohol fermentation. And then now I do everything spontaneous. Malolactic has always been really hard for me because of low pH, high acidity. So I used to have malolactic going till the summer after the harvest. And I don't really like it because the wine stays uncovered all the winter. So now I select malolactic. I inoculate malolactic that goes on the same time of alcoholic fermentation. And I think that makes a huge difference on the result that you have on the wine. And those are, as I said, all things that you learn by doing. If you do it on your own and you see how things change, a bit as we said at the beginning with nature, we need to adjust. And that's what I'm doing with the grapes and with the wines.
That is a lot of things. There's a lot there to pick apart, and we probably don't have time to do it all. I just want to ask, so you're basically kind of doing partial, like a semi-carbonic, or
Yeah, because we leave the berries full, part of the berries get carbonic fermentation. You don't really feel it in the wine, in my opinion, because at a certain point, I keep the berries in the tank for around 30 days, more or less. So in the end, we arrive in the end of the maceration that we have, depending, of course, on the harvest, but then we have a 40% with the harvest that has thick skins that is still closed. On vintages that the skins are a bit more fine, we have a 20-25%. So every vintage it's different. I don't think you can really feel it in the glass, but it happens in the tank.
Okay. As I recall it, the difference was kind of in the tannins, right? Like it felt like the tannins had changed over time as you had incorporated more of that whole berry in your winemaking.
A lot. If we will ever have the chance to try together my Chianti Classico 2015, Stephanie, it's like having a sharp knife on your tongue. Like it's a huge, it's a huge difference. That kind of tannin makes the wine age really differently and weighs lower. To make those. Of course, then I change a lot of things, but the harsh tannins to make them a bit more soft, the easiest way would be to work with wood, but I don't like to work. I think for where I am, Sangiovese needs time in the cellar. Some plots needs also a bit of wood, but not new and not small. Otherwise, the wine would bend under the wood. And so also if I would have some good results on the tannin, I would have the impact of the flavor of the wood. So by working as I work with really gentle wood only on the grapes that come from the Riserva de Gran Selezione, the old plots, I need to work on the tannins in a different way because I don't want to have the wood. And the idea of the berry came for that.
Okay. All right. Well, it sounds like we are just about running out of time here. Bay is letting us know that. But just one last question for you, because I'm just curious. As somebody who's now been making wine for about 10 years, and you're relatively small, how many bottles do you make a year, approximately?
So I do 25,000 bottles a year.
Yeah. So that's not. And how many countries do you export to?
I export more or less to 5, 6 countries. US is my main export market.
Mhm.
Then other in Europe and Australia and Japan on the east part of the world.
End up having to do most, if not all, parts of the whole process of what a winery has to go through. And I'm just curious, maybe you have people helping you with some of the administrative stuff, but I would like to hear, what are your favorite things about your job as a winemaker or as a winery owner? And what are the least favorite?
So I choose to do this work as no one in my family was doing wine. So I choose this work because I slowly got inspired, but the first light that came in my process of thinking about doing wine was meeting Salvioni, and he was talking about his life and his connection to the nature and to the territory on a way that I said, I want to have the same life. So I choose this work for the place where I am and for the relationship with the nature. So for me, I love the cellar and the vineyard part. I don't like the office. I'm slowly growing and I hope that I will reach my maximum could be 35,000 bottles. I don't want to become bigger, but that's what I can do here in Tregole. And I rather have a person helping me in the office than having someone that is doing the work for me in the cellar or in the vineyard, because that's what I like. I think the fascinating part about this job and the part that I love and that I hope that people feel in the glass, it's the dedication and the work that we do in the cellar and in the field. And as you can imagine, all the things that I learned by doing it, I would never learn it if I would sit in an office. And I would never take some choices if I won't be the one doing it. And so I want to keep that. I think that's the best part of our job. Also, if we face our, let's say, boss is the nature, and can be a good boss, but can be a pretty strict boss sometimes. So sometimes it's really hard, but it's still the best part.
Well, it's great to talk to you. It's really interesting to talk to someone who's so thoughtful about the way that they approach winemaking and who's willing to, sort of share things that they think they did right and things that they didn't maybe do right and that they've now learned something new. So I really appreciate your candor, and I always enjoy talking to you, Sophie, and I think you're doing great work there. So thank you for
Thank you,
joining
Stefan.
us.
Thank you. It was great also for me to talk to you. We make a lot of mistakes. Huh? I make a lot of mistakes. The
Who
good thing
does?
about this job is that every mistake you do, usually it's a loss, and so you never do it twice. So that's the good part.
That's,
But it's a matter of growing, I think.
yeah,
Thank you for your thoughts about Tregole and me and for supporting us.
yes. All
It
right.
means a lot.
Thanks very much. And thanks to everybody who listened.
Thank you, everybody. If you
Thank you.
come to Italy, come visit me.
Yes.
I think that they will. So thank you so much, Stephanie and Sophie. That was such a nice interview, really. Good job. It was amazing. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for spending the time with us. And for those who are interested to participate, just send us a DM through our Instagram or mail our Italian Wine Podcast producer at info@italianwinepodcast.com. Thank you, everyone, for listening in. And thank you so much again, Sophie and Stephanie. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Listen to the Italian Wine Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We're on SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Himalaya FM, and more. Don't forget to subscribe and rate the show. If you enjoy listening, please consider donating through italianwinepodcast.com. Any amount helps cover equipment, production, and publication costs. Until next time, cin cin.